The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Illya Friedman.
Hey everybody, it's episode 23 of the Cinematography podcast.
You're Ben Rock.
And you are Illya Friedman.
Last time I checked. Hey, all right, it's episode 23. We made it this far.
We've made it this far. It's 23 means that there's something like 4 days worth of content that people could listen to. That's just interviews with some awesome cinematographers. So.
And we've been getting some really good feedback. I've bumped into a couple of people lately, and actually we ended up doing some work for someone who is from Canada who listens to the podcast. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's amazing. So, hey, the podcast.
I didn't know that. That's news to me.
It's
that's
like the third time someone who's listened to the podcast has actually called us up and said, hey, listen to the podcast. And Hot Rod Cameras, we'd like to actually buy some gear from you or have you do some work for us, which is amazing. So I'm really thrilled that this podcast actually did what it sort of was intended to, is like to be a promotional vehicle for Hot Rod Cameras. It did. It's done it 3 times over. So.
Sweet. So it's paid for itself.
But really, this is fun. Really, what this ultimately comes down to is you and I having fun. We talk about movies. We talk about tech. We talk to people.
Yeah.
We have a lot of fun stuff, and we have a great person on the show today.
Yeah, today our guest is Jaron Presant, who, for those of you who don't know him off the top of your head, he is the second unit DP on pretty much every Rian Johnson film. So he works with Steve Yedlin a lot. He and Steve Yedlin and Rian Johnson went to college together, and most recently he was the cinematographer on Rampage, the awesome movie with The Rock and lots of CGI monsters.
I was a big fan of the video game. I know it's based on a video game, loosely based on a video game. But you saw it in the theater, right?
I saw it in the theater, and this also comes back to why it's been so long since our last episode. If you heard, and not the one with Fade on Papa Michael, but the previous episode with Johnny Durango, we were talking about how I was about to become a dad. Well,
surprise,
that all happened. I was actually editing Johnny Durango in the hospital as Alicia was in labor. Basically, she was in labor for a couple of days. So I was sitting there with my laptop editing Johnny Durango and getting that out the door. Rampage was actually the last movie that I saw in the theater before the boy popped out. His name is Madden Wolf Rock. You can call him Mad Wolf.
Wow.
Mad Wolf Rock.
You did that on purpose.
I mean, the reasons for the name are many, but it is a fringe benefit that we get to call him Mad Wolf. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's not nearly as bad a curse as Illya is. So that's, he's going to be able to order a pizza.
I don't think it's a curse at all. So, and I don't think Illya is a curse either, but.
Wow. Hey, Ben, since now becoming a parent, has it changed your lifestyle? Are you still getting out to the movies? Are you still doing any of the,
I've seen exactly one movie since he was born in the theater. I've seen plenty on Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatnot, but only one in the theater, and that was at a Mommy and Me screening, which are these screenings they do at 11 a.m. on Monday mornings that they let kids with crying babies into. And it was like...
Were there a lot of crying babies in that theater?
There were probably under 20 people in the theater. But yeah, I mean, you have that instinct when you hear a crying baby of get that crying baby out of here. Oh, wait, that's the whole point of the screening. But they keep the volume down a little bit. They keep the lights up a little bit. And we went there and saw Deadpool 2.
Totally appropriate to bring a small baby to who...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the first movie that he actually watched sitting on a couch with me was Fargo. So.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So...
at least you're getting them started with the classics, with the Coen brothers. And he also did watch Reanimator, the Stuart Gordon film. Of course he did.
Yeah. So I mean, anyway, but yeah, so we did. That's the last time that I was in a movie theater, and of course, like this, all these amazing horror movies that everyone keeps saying I must see are out, and I'm just gonna have to wait for them all to come onto Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And then in addition to that, I'm kind of loath to tell you, but I've been cheating on our podcast with another podcast.
You dirty rat.
Yeah. So I co-wrote and directed, and am currently in post on a fiction horror podcast that is done in the style of like a Serial or an S-Town or an In the Dark, like a first-person investigative podcast that gets extraordinarily Lovecraftian by the end.
Okay, well, it's fiction. I don't feel so bad now. It's like,
it's like fully cast. We recorded 45 pages a day some days.
Yeah, if you told me you were off like doing another cinematography podcast of some sort, we'd have
that'd
some
be
words.
weird. I mean, unless I was teaching the ASC how to use adequate microphones and recording technology.
Hey, let's dive right into the interview, and we got some other great stuff on the show today.
All right, cool. So here, without further ado, is Jaron Presant.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
All right, so I'm here at Hot Rod Cameras with Jaron Presant. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks for having.
So I always start with what has kind of become my stock question, and that is, I believe that when cinematographers read a script, they look at it and they interpret it either in terms of how it's going to be lit, like what it's going to look like, or what the composition is, how it's going to be framed. And some people we've talked to have said, I reject that premise, which is fair too. I kind of just use it to kick it off and say, like, what goes through your head when you're reading a script? What's the first thing you see? What's your first interpretation?
I would probably say that I don't separate those two things. Like when I'm first reading the script, I just see images in my head. And the images they're both about light and about composition. It's about camera movement. It's about all of that. Yeah. So it's not like when I'm first reading a script, I see the idea of light and don't have any sense of images that go along with the lighting. Mm-hmm. I see it all as one. But then as I keep going through the script again and again, each of those things I delve deeper and deeper into each of the things. The lighting becomes more ingrained in what the characters are going through and what would be the most effective for the story, and the same thing with the composition and what the camera movement can do, and how can we best say what's happening with these characters with the camera.
So they inform each, because I always think about compositional based. I mean, like I don't know. I've never interviewed any of like Wong Kar-wai's DPs, but you look at those movies and it's like very specific composition. Like the composition is outrageously specific, and that might come from Wong Kar-wai in that case.
Yeah, I mean, but also Wong Kar-wai has that whole thing about the space and how the space informs the images, and like like I remember reading about him and Christopher Doyle, and they would go to spaces and they wouldn't think about how they were going to cover a scene until they got to the space, and then you see the space, and the space informs the images and how they're going to photograph the whole movie, both in terms of light and in terms of camera. That's a really organic process,
Yeah, I guess that makes sense too.
So,
but his stuff, I mean, and
beautiful process.
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at anyone's films where like every frame looks like you would hang it on your wall, like to me, I kind of go, that's a composition person. And even though he kind of corrected me, we had early in the podcast, we had a guy named Fraser Bradshaw on, and Fraser was one of the people who'd put this idea in my head, and he even said like, if I did, I think you're misunderstanding me. But I still I have a theory that a lot of people who come out of the camera department are actually very excited about lighting. And a lot of people who come up through the lighting department think in terms of composition, because it's not the thing they're always thinking, because it's new and exciting and different.
It's interesting. I mean, I came up through camera initially, but then became fascinated with light and ended up becoming a gaffer. And then it was from being a gaffer that I actually kind of transitioned into a DP.
So you did both, actually?
Did both, yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah.
That further bolsters my theory.
Oh, there we go. Both and both. There we go.
I'm going to keep working on this. So when you say you came up through the camera, so what was your starting point? Where did you come from?
In high school, I wanted to be, going way back, I wanted to be a fine art still photographer. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of a failed still photographer because I realized that, I saw still photography and I said, it'd be a very lonely career, because you're just by yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I love collaboration.
But you wouldn't be. I mean, fine art still photographers have staffs of people.
The thing that I love with still photography is not like studio still photography. I like landscapes and I like found photography and that kind of Henry Cartier-Bresson style, documentary photography type stuff.
Oh, neat.
And I always wanted to do that, but I saw my life as like, traveling but really slightly lonely in terms of the work.
Like a hobo with a camera on your back?
Hobo with a camera at 12. This is how I saw myself. But I loved movies, and I knew I wanted to do something that was collaborative, and so I tried to get on movie sets, and when I got on one and I saw a cinematographer, I was like, that's exactly what I should do.
What was the movie set?
It was Killing Zoe.
Nice.
And I befriended Tom Richmond, who was the DP on the movie, and I ended up working up through his camera department. And
oh wow!
Just spread out and worked with other DPs. And
now at that point, had you gone to film school? I
was in high school.
You were in high school when Killing Zoe came out.
Yeah. So, and then, so I worked up through the camera department, and then also simultaneously went to film school, because Tom had a great story about. He went to Harvard in the 60s, and at some point with war protests and whatnot, he said, I'm leaving the university. And then a year later, he was like, what the hell have I done? Well, you don't do that. And so he was so into education. So the whole time we were working, he was like, no, but you're gonna go to college. You should go to college. You should go to college. And so I went to USC while ACing, and then coming out of college. It's like you were saying, I was all in the camera department and started getting fascinated with lighting. And so I started working as an electrician too. And
interesting.
And I came up as a gaffer.
So you went to USC. Mm-hmm. Were you undergrad or grad over there?
Undergrad.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That school, when I first moved to LA, my wife had a job in the student industry relations office. She worked for Larry Auer back there. And I just remember, because I went to a tiny film program in Florida, and they had like underwater housings for their lights at USC, and it was like, you have what?
Wow, they did?
You did.
I didn't. Wow.
You had like such like, we'd been shooting on CP16s with like redhead kits, and you guys had like the real stuff.
I feel like, the real stuff, I think there was like one SR in the school when I was there, and there were a lot of Arri S's. I love that camera though.
I love that. It's a cool camera.
Yeah.
So was it SR2 or SR3?
Oh no, there was an SR.
Oh, just the SR, the first SR.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think maybe when I was leaving, they were like, Claremont was giving him an SR2. Maybe.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember. But yeah, they didn't have a ton of, they had a ton of stuff. By all film school standards, they had a ton of stuff, but it was like, I didn't ever see underwater housing. That would be cool.
Now, were you are you from LA?
From Missouri originally, but I grew up in LA.
Okay, so you were already out here, and USC wasn't a mysterious place across the country.
No, I actually wanted to go to NYU, but USC gave me more money.
Oh,
and film school is expensive.
It is not cheap. So while you're in film school, you're working in the camera department.
Working in the camera department, and I also had a friend who he wanted to be a music video director, and I wanted to be a DP. And he also started a side business doing like little punk records, right? Just as like punk 7 inches and stuff like that. And so he would do some music videos that I would shoot for him. And so I was acing on real jobs, and then kind of shooting these small, tiny little music videos with him.
And going to USC.
And going to USC, yeah.
Wow, that's a lot to do at one time.
Yeah, stuff on weekends and then shifting around. But I think that was part of the learning experiences, because you want to see how it's done on a real set and then go experiment with it, right? So yeah. And I never saw, I remember being in film school, and people would be super worked up about, oh my gosh, I've got a film due, and it's like, how am I going to get this done? And I never had any of that anxiety about making films. It was just such an exciting process to me that it didn't feel daunting, Now things, the bigger they get, the more there's a lot more work involved. But it's like, but I'm never like, it's more of an excitement, not like I remember some of the students were just like frozen in fear of the thing. And never felt that way to me. Well,
it always seems weird to me when someone's treating an assignment at a film program like I have to go write an essay on Chaucer.
Exactly. It's like
you're making a movie.
They just told you to go make a movie. What? Like it's like vacation.
Isn't that why you're here?
Like, don't tell anybody I said that. It's not like vacation. It's work.
It's work. It's very hard work, and should be paid and compensated very highly. No, so that's cool. So, did you work with any punk bands at the time that we would have heard of?
Yeah, we did NoFX and Guttermouth. And,
oh wow!
There were a bunch of them, and I'm forgetting all the names. I think we did Lagwagon.
Are any of those videos online? Can we find them all?
I'm sure it's the internet. You can find anything, right?
It's surprising sometimes when you can't. I'm like,
It's also funny because you're like, I remember there was a time where I remembered every one of them, right? And now I'm like, I can't remember. There are so many little things.
Well, do you ever look back at that stuff, kind of through the lens of what you know now and how you would do it now?
I do. It's funny, like, I look back sometimes and say, what the hell kind of choices was I making? Because at each point you learn, right?
Yeah.
And I don't usually go back that far, but I do go back to earlier in once I actually was really starting to shoot. And even then, heck, even going back just a few years, I always feel like that you're always learning and you're always pressing into new areas, right? Because that's the whole point. You should always be learning. Every job is a new learning experience. And so, but when I go back all the way to there's some things where I'm like, wow, I hadn't figured out something on the lighting front. I hadn't quite figured that out. I hadn't quite figured out how backy I could push the key. I hadn't figured out, how deep I could go with fill or not. The nuances of it weren't finalized.
And I assume back then you're shooting most of the stuff on film, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was all 16, some Super 8 stuff and but mostly 16. We shot some 35 from time to time, but it wasn't until later that, I remember that time when you're like, oh, and we get to shoot 35.
I know.
It was so great. It was really fun. It was great. Those were good days.
Yeah, well, it still happens. Like when people tell me that they're shooting something on 35, their eyes light up. They're always excited that they're doing something on 35. And it's not that anyone's down, like work is work, but every DP I know, it's like if they're shooting on the Alexa or whatever, it's like, yeah, it's cool, we got an Alexa, but it's like there's a special, the director really pushed for 35. And it's like...
I think especially now, there's like a nostalgia to the thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I love film and I'm like so like deeply committed to the look of photochemically printed film. I really, really love that. And I'm all about emulating that digitally. When I shoot digitally, it's all about emulating a photochemical print finish, and then working within that complexity. But there is something really nostalgic to like the purr of the camera and the whole thing.
A lot of times for me when I hear it, I just hear my bank account emptying. But
that's with IMAX. But IMAX is beautiful.
Oh, of course.
Photochemically printed IMAX is.
And and today where you can like call up any number of looks on Resolve or any Colorista or whatever you're using, there's still something cool about like, no, we're going to cross process this and we're going to get this look that you can only get this one crazy chemical way or something.
Well, I don't know. Like that, I would take some issue with saying that you can only get it that way. I think that you can get any look digitally, provided that you can properly characterize it. Right. That's one of the big shortcomings of digital pipelines right now is that we don't tend to be specific enough in how we characterize stuff, and then if you aren't taking the time to properly characterize stuff and then you don't get the result you want, you can't throw away the process and say it's the process's fault, right?
What do you mean by characterize?
So let's take film, for example. You need to characterize the density characteristics of it, right? So that you have to characterize the color response, right? You have to characterize the film, the grain. You have to characterize the movement, like the 2D movement of gate weave and whatnot, and you have to characterize some of the idiosyncratic responses like halation, right?
Yeah.
If you don't get all of those things, but then you say, okay, well, it does, digital doesn't have the feel. You're not really making an accurate comparison, right?
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is like when we say, and it like you brought up cross process, that's actually something I'd really want to characterize, but I've got to find the right project where that's the thing that we're wanting to do. And there's an argument for just doing that process, right?
Yeah.
But we're in a time as well where you have to know all of the potential pitfalls that come with doing any process, right? So
when you're shooting something digitally, do you ever think about, if I were doing this on film, here's what I would want it to look like? What's a process I can come up with to emulate that look or that feel?
Well, so when I shoot digitally, I set the entire pipeline up for print emulation, and then when I'm shooting, it's exactly like shooting film. I light with the light meter. The monitors are just reference. It's like a really great video tap.
Yeah.
On a motion picture camera, on a film camera.
Does it affect you though, now that like everybody on the crew can see sort of the ultimate product that you're creating on the day, and so everyone can chime in and have an opinion about it, as opposed to a video tap, which would look grainy and weird?
You know, I think there's two sides of that. One is a political question of like, have you set up the relationships up front with everybody who's involved, to understand how you're taking the image through the entire image chain, right? Mm-hmm. And have you created the correct prestige faith relationships with all the parties that have a say,
which sometimes you don't even have time to do on a job.
Well, yeah, it depends on the job. I mean, to me, that's a huge part of the job, is actually creating those relationships. And it's actually, like I said, I got into this business for a large part because of the collaboration. So those relationships are things that I actually kind of cherish, right?
Yeah.
And I pay a lot of attention to those things. So to me, that's like one of the major things that you need to do in prepping a job, however short or long they are, if that makes any sense.
For sure.
But yeah, and then the flip side to that is like, there's especially if you get into like, commercial world, there's a big the still photography commercial world has, their agencies have become very accustomed to, as soon as the photographer has snapped a photo, it's gone through the entire process, and there's an image they can look at that is the end final image. Yeah. Right. And the commercial agencies are looking for an analogous motion picture version. Right. So they're looking for the image that they see on a monitor to be the final thing, which to me, that's actually not what we're trying to do on set. What we're trying to do on set is get the basis of an image that's going to be finished with a proper post chain. Right. Yeah. So it's getting people understanding what the post chain is going to do.
But do you build like lookup tables or something that emulate as close to what the end product is?
Yeah, so for every job that I do, I have a single show lot that covers that job. So
yeah, because I mean, I don't mean anything against commercial agencies, because they've employed me from time to time, and they're very nice people, and some of them are my good friends. But sometimes they don't understand that it's not their job to understand that whole process.
Yeah, yeah.
And you don't have time.
And that's it. It's your job to try to kind of walk them into it, right? Yeah. As best you can, given the time you've got.
Exactly. Like sometimes on a commercial, you get the call on Wednesday and you're shooting by Friday.
For sure. Especially nowadays.
Yeah. So yeah, and if you know them, then you can obviously talk about whatever. And I've worked with some agency people who are extremely savvy about that stuff, and I've worked with some who are like, are these numbers going to be on the screen? And it's like, no, that's just your monitor.
That's great. Yeah, maybe. No, I'm joking. Totally joking.
The correct answer is always yes. Yes, the numbers, you can't get them out. It's just a glitch, we got the wrong camera, and
it's all good.
Nike will forgive you. So at what point does Steve Yedlin come into your life?
Steve and I met in college. I met Steve in college. I met Ryan in college. Steve and I, so we met in college. We really started hanging out after college because we were both the two guys who really were into cinematography.
And by the way, the Ryan that you just brought up, that's
Rian Johnson.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe you've heard of him.
I don't know who he is. Yeah. So, as we got out of college, as I started getting jobs, Steve was working as a gaffer at the time, and I started hiring him as a gaffer. He started hiring me as a gaffer. So we started gaffing for each other, and that's basically how we came up. I was doing a lot of commercials, and he was starting into the feature world, and so we gaffed for one another. And
that's cool.
As we kept working, I shifted from gaffing to doing second unit, and then we kept growing. So
yeah, because the first credit that you have with him, with you doing second unit, is May. Am I correct? Yeah. May is one of those movies that somebody gave me on VHS, like a store-bought copy of it, and was like, watch it, and I was like, okay, and I tried watching it like I wasn't paying full attention to it, and I went back and they were like, no, you have to watch it completely over, and you cannot stop watching until the end. Luckily, it's before smartphones, and like that movie has one of the most amazing endings of any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, like, it's fantastic.
It's so brilliant.
It's fantastic.
The whole construction of it. But
Lucky's a genius.
When you're, Lucky McKee, he's done a lot of like cool little like psychological thriller horror kind of things.
He's amazing.
What does a second unit like? How did a movie like that end up having a second unit at all?
Well, the second unit on that was literally like we don't have enough time to shoot the whole movie, because I gaffed that movie too.
Okay.
So we don't have enough time to shoot everything. So how can we get everything done? So we're in one room basically shooting this this set that everything's lit and it's kind of done. Now remember, Steve was also a gaffer, so at that point I would be like, we would say, okay, well, I'm going to go into the next room and shoot these little pieces that we missed, while they're shooting in the other room. That's the second unit. That's it. On that movie.
And
really
second unit,
small.
like, I mean, maybe this is something that you're the first person who's done as much second unit as you've done that we've had on the show, and I've directed a little bit of second unit. So I have a sense of it. And when I got the first call about directing second unit, I called Todd Hallowell, who had done second unit for Ron Howard on a bunch of films, and he gave me some insight into it. But the more I've done, the more I realize second unit can really just mean whatever the individual film wants it to mean.
It is, yeah. It can be everything from tiny little inserts to full sequences. Yeah.
Well, like Tony Liberatore, who we had on here, he's a storyboard artist, and he does all the Fast and Furious movies. And Tony, I went to see one of the Fast and Furious movies with him, and it was when Justin Lin was still directing them, and I was like, so was Justin Lin there when you guys were doing all this stuff? He's like, no, second unit's all the car chases. I'm like, the car chases in the Fast and the Furious movies are all second unit, like that's the second unit, and I think it would surprise people to know that, but also I think sometimes there's a badge of pride that you'll hear like Christopher Nolan doesn't work with the second unit, and I think it's because he's trying to keep his vision pure. So from your point of view, when you're doing second unit, if I was to say, hypothetically, as a director, I don't want a second unit because I want it all to be my vision, but I need a second unit because I've got to cram 50 pounds of shit into a 10-pound bag here, schedule-wise. If I bring you on, what am I going to get from you and or a second unit director like the ones you've worked with?
Well, I mean, like I think from the director standpoint.
Well, I guess my question is, it's such a loaded question. Fuck it. I'm just going to I'm going to sort of ask from your point of view. So you're there to execute the first unit director's idea of whatever it is you're there to do, correct?
Yeah, for sure.
So how does your second unit, when you've done it, how does that interact with the first unit?
It really depends on the movie and how it's set up, because some movies have a second unit director, some don't. So there are some movies where what you're trying to do is do as much as you can for the main unit director without the main unit director present, or with very little interaction with the main unit. And then there are some where the main unit director has a second unit director and they've had a conversation, and then they've let the second unit director run with it. And then there's some movies where the main unit director is the second unit director, and they just bounce back and forth, So each movie kind of has its own type of setup, and it depends on how the director wants it set up as to what the job will entail and how you kind of fine tune it to the job. So to me, that's like one of the big things with successful second units is you have to be a successful second unit is malleable to the needs of the main unit director and how they want to set up the execution of their vision.
So, and this is a big question. Tell me what's awesome about it.
Awesome about second unit?
Yeah.
The potentially fun things about second unit are, I guess it really depends on the job. I mean, second unit can be amazing and it can be the worst thing in the world. It can be amazing because you shoot gigantic sequences and with lots of toys and lots of or I shouldn't say toys, with lots of complex equipment that can yield really amazing images. And second unit can be amazing because it's so if you do it correctly, it's so integrative with main unit. So there's a sense of challenge that I think is there, of like really capturing what the style of the film is, because you have to really understand what you're really aiming for.
Yeah.
And that's also a challenge. That's a huge challenge, because sometimes the thing that you would be aiming for is not your aesthetic. I don't really do those jobs anymore, but like in terms of the ones with other DPs who the aesthetic doesn't align with. But it doesn't matter if you're doing a second unit job and your aesthetic isn't the same as the main unit's. main unit DP's aesthetic. It doesn't matter. You're still there to execute their aesthetic, not yours. So it's a very different job than shooting a main unit. Now, when I do second unit with Steve and Ryan, that's a really, really easy process because Steve and I came up together. Our aesthetics are almost identical.
And you all went to college together, so
I mean, but like more importantly, like what our influences are, what we love, what we don't like, those are all totally aligned, right?
Yeah.
And so then the conversations are more about what are we trying to do on this film? What's our philosophical approach to the film? Well, in terms of camera work, in terms of lighting, what are we trying to do conceptually? And then that's the end of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
Because then from that, all of the details are solved out of the one concept, the one approach. So we don't have to get into like, for that scene, we need a 10K out it's coming through those windows and we need this and that. It's not about that. It's like, we know what the style is and then our aesthetics are lined up.
And with Rian Johnson, is there a second unit director that you're working with, or?
No, it's just Ryan. Ryan directs everything on his movies.
So he comes over to second unit and kind of...
It varies on each film. It's been a little different. So
even on The Last Jedi?
Yeah, every film I set up a custom way for that film that we can try and make it as easy as possible for Ryan to integrate into and have feedback for the second unit, right? And so with each film, with the resources at hand and the time at hand, the solution to that has been different. But the idea is, if he can come physically, he's there. If that scheduling doesn't work out, then we have some way for him to review live. If he can't review live, then we have some way for him for the shots to be reviewed just either while we wait or at a later date, where then, and if it's some later date, then there's the potential to go back if we need to.
Interesting. So when I had that conversation that I had with Todd Hallowell, he said that on Apollo 13, he'd made up T-shirts for the second unit that said if it was easy, first unit would have done it.
Yeah, there's some stuff like that.
So so that's kind of my question is, when you've done second unit, do you find that you end up like doing the non-dialogue scene, like the big special effects thing, or the really meticulous slow car rig or something?
The standard thing for second units is just that. Like, I mean, on Rampage, we had some really massive stunt sequences where we could do everything leading up to one stunt, right? But that one stunt was going to take all day to shoot one shot. So that we might prep the whole thing, but then we left it for a second unit to actually execute the actual shot. Because it's going to take too long for a main unit, which has a limited amount of time with actors and everything, and is it's a massive group. It doesn't move quickly. I mean, you can't shift quickly, and then you've got that set against. But you do need to actually get a lot of like the actual meat of the movie done, right?
Yeah, dialogue scenes. You have actors who have limited schedules.
Exactly.
And all that
you
stuff.
Set that against. You've got this one shot that's going to take a whole day to shoot, and that's the thing you leave for a second unit, and the same thing holds true with Ryan's stuff and with everything. When you've got very complex shots that you're trying to do, you can use a second unit to keep those complex shots. There's also another thing that's overlooked a lot, is that it's that you especially with Ryan, he may leave more mundane shots that are actually sometimes with dialogue and everything that he knows he can come over and because he's directing everything, he knows he can come do them. But he leaves those for my unit because it allows main unit to do some very, very complex, master shot that otherwise you wouldn't have the time to do. So you're both buying main unit more time for more complexity, and you're relieving them of complex shots that would take too long. That's why it's hard to find, that trying to find really great second units that align well. That's a tough job.
So on Brick, and actually, I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast. A friend of mine used to produce promos for Disney. You might have worked on some of them because his name is Chad Saley. His company was Hieroglyphic Productions. Mm-hmm. And Chad told me one day that he was working with this director on one of the Disney promos, and they were at lunch, and he was telling him this great idea for this kind of noir set at a high school. idea that he had, and Chad was like, "Dude, you just gotta quit doing these stupid Disney promos and go make that movie." And that movie was Brick. The director was Rian Johnson, and Chad said, "Why didn't I give myself that advice?"
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting, it's like he was already kind of a working director, an up-and-coming director, but I remember seeing Brick in the theater and just being blown away, and seeing the beauty of independent film is that movies can come out of nowhere that you've never heard of and surprise you in such amazing ways. And Brick was definitely one of those. So just kind of take me into the world of the production of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, Brick, I gaffed Brick. I shot second unit, and then another friend of ours, Todd Cinematography, shot some second unit on Brick too. So,
how many days of a shoot was Brick?
I think it was 18.
That's pretty tight.
So yeah, it was fast. So,
and what was the atmosphere like? And I mean, like, you guys were all film school buddies. And was that the first feature that you'd all gotten to make together?
Well, so we'd done May, not with Ryan, but with Lucky. Lucky went to college with us too.
Oh, okay.
So May was probably the first movie that we all as college friends got to make together, and then Brick was another, and Todd was at college with us as well. I mean, it was. I remember Brick was kind of an amazing job. It was one of those, like, everybody's getting paid the same thing, and everybody's like, you're just in it, deep in the trenches together. It was an amazing experience, and I mean, it was like, Ryan's an unbelievable filmmaker, and his scripts. I read his scripts, and I of course want to work on them, but I just want to see them. Like, you read them on the page and you're just like, I cannot wait to sit in a theater and watch this, because they're so visual and they're such amazing stories,
So you've worked on Brothers Bloom, and you worked on all of those all the way up to and including Last Jedi.
Yeah.
So I have to ask the obligatory Last Jedi. Holy crap! Like, that to me is the brass ring of especially any, like, film school person from roughly our two generations. Yeah, like, working on a Star Wars movie. That's pretty heavy hardware right there.
It was complete. I mean, it was totally surreal. I mean, the original Star Wars is why. It's why I got excited about film. You know? And I can remember them coming out, and I can remember standing in line. They're formative for me. And the funny thing about it was, like, I think everybody involved, they were formative for.
Oh yeah.
And it was it's not always the case that people are as excited about the thing and the history, the heritage of the thing you're doing, but when that's there and it's so pervasive across everyone, it's something really, really, really special. And what it meant to me personally, and to Steve and to Ryan, and it was a really exciting project and really amazing experience.
So when you're working on something like that, and you're kind of looking at this legacy of these films, what are the pains that you're going through to stay true to, and it's not just the canon story-wise, but just like the way, are you going back and looking at what lenses they used? Are you using any of the original lenses? Or, like, is there, how fetishistic are we staying to making the new ones? Because I feel like especially the last two really feel like Star Wars movies, like when I was a kid, unlike the prequels. No offense to the prequels, but yeah, I'm a bigger fan of them. Of the so, what level of accuracy or research did you guys go through?
I mean, like Empire was the big, driving force visually that we were trying to play into, but we also aren't making that movie. We're making a new movie that stylistically it takes that as a reference. But where we really focused on that was in terms of the style of lights and the style of lighting. The style of lights more so than the style of lighting.
Well, I guess that's what I'm getting at is, like, how much do you make? You don't want it to be a museum piece. You don't want it to be a dead thing. You want it to be a living new film.
And it really, it's Ryan. If you look at it, the camera work is Ryan style. Ryan has a very distinct. Ryan and Steve, they have a very distinct camera style that is a very, very strong. Distinct camera moves that with strong composition, And that's in there. That it definitely has that thumbprint. So it doesn't just repeat what was there before. It takes that as a style in a world that we're going to work within, but we're doing something totally new with it.
And how do you typify that style? Like, how would you break down the characteristics that you guys maybe had talked about?
I mean, it was a lot of putting a lot of lights in the shot. It was a lot of pill lights, the style of the practicals. The feeling of the camera inside the cockpits, and feeling really present with the pilots. All of that was worked into it, But but then on top of that, you layer on top of that, Steve and I had a conversation about how, one of the real driving force was to be really cinematic with the lighting, pushing keys really very deep, fairly far upstage, and really trying to drive real cinematic imagery.
Now, when you're saying like
contrast,
like when you're saying putting the keys, when you're putting them deep, putting them further upstage.
Yep.
So what exactly do you mean by that?
So it's like stage direction, where it's back in Shakespeare, you got the stage is tilted and the people are flat, and so upstage is further away and downstage is closer to camera. So moving your key light deeper into the sets. So it's more backlight, and it's more, but not just backlight like a back edge, but it's backlight as in your entire key is shifted back, so that then you're wrapping the key in, downstage, and then you can let things fall off into like really strong contrast, but very soft. So it was a kind of a driving principle in terms of how we were setting things up. A lot of like with Steve and Ryan, I mean, they've developed like the core of what we're trying to stylistically create. And then Steve and I talk about conceptual approach to lighting, and Ryan comes in with these are the shots that we're going to do. And then we do a back and forth, 90% of the time it's like the shots that Ryan designs are just fantastic. But then through the little back and forth, maybe we get a few different shots that come up. But Ryan's his shot design is unbelievable.
Well, so let's use shot design as a pivot to you talking about your own cinematography. When you're talking about like what
you mean, main unit cinematography?
When you do your own stuff, because recently you just joined the ASC, correct? So like Rampage is your first like big budget movie where you are the DP on it. So when you're talking about shot design, and I this is something I think about a lot. What goes into shot design? So you can talk about Rian Johnson, you can talk about anybody, but like what constitutes, what kind of shot design do you want someone to hand to you as a DP so that like if a director comes in and says, here's a schematic for my shot, then it kind of takes a little bit of your creativity away.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would kind of take a little bit of issue with that. I mean, I don't think that I think there's all sorts of directors, right? And there are directors. I worked with Toby Hooper. I did a movie for him.
Toolbox Murder, right?
No. Toolbox Murder, Steve shot. I shot Mortuary.
Oh, okay.
So, Toby will come onto a set and you can give him exactly how, or he did. Yeah. That was a tragic loss.
Seriously.
Yeah. Downer moment. Sorry.
Way to bring the room down.
Yeah, there it is.
Well, Toby Hooper's like,
Toby's phenomenal.
There's several iconic shots like in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that are just like, you look at them even today and there's that one shot when the woman's first walk into the house.
Yep.
So when you were working with him,
Toby was a fantastic collaborator. Like he was phenomenal. He said he viewed himself as a comedy director. He always wanted to be a comedy director, and so like actually, if you watch his movies back and you think about that, it makes total sense.
Especially Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. When you watch it, it's almost a parody of the first one.
It is so hilarious. But it's always in all of his films. There's this little dark comedy thread. It doesn't. He never took himself too seriously, which I thought was kind of brilliant. But in terms of collaborating, like he would come onto a set and he would turn to me and in prep and on the day and just be like, what do you want to do? In terms of shot design. And we would talk through it, right? It wasn't like I would just say, hey, here's how the camera's going to, I would suggest that this is a type of coverage, and then it would be a little back and forth in a discussion. But then there are other directors who have a complete idea of what what they want.
Yeah.
And like, so on Rampage, Brad Payton, he has a really strong sense of camera, but he's really also very open to new ideas and stuff. So from that, we can, in prep, we develop a sense of what we want stylistically the camera to do, right? And that was a thing that we did together. But then we're both thinking about about what the camera should do. We've set up the concept early on, stylistically. How are we going to approach the camera? How are we going to approach composition? How are we going to approach camera movement? And now we're answering. So whenever we're looking at coverage, we're answering it from the same.
So are you saying that you kind of set up a set of rules or a set of a style guide?
A style. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, I think that's part of prep on any project, where you're trying to figure out what's the style, what's the camera style that's the most evocative for what this story is, right? And it may have multiple styles depending on the characters, right?
Yeah.
So like you might have, one plot line and one set of characters that has a camera that is loose, while the other one is very very composed.
Like two characters within the same scene, where one person's more kind of handheld. And
maybe not within the same scene, or maybe those things crash in a scene. I'm saying like that's the type of thing that you can, those conceptual approaches are things that you can go through with the director and kind of pull out from the story. Like I did this movie called 10 Stories Tall, and in that one we had, it was a big ensemble cast, and some of it's all about these characters kind of dealing with death and changes in life. And so some of the characters were all about centered and balanced compositions, and some were completely unbalanced.
Yeah.
And so that sets up the stage of how you're going to approach the whole thing, so that then you start designing all of the shots from that. And that's where that's where all the shot design comes from. You start with a concept, and then you pull all the shot design from that. And then, so that then everything's coherent, and you can actually tell stories. You can drive the visual style forward with the characters. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I sort of feel like my first question is sort of based on starting to glean like how you do what you're describing right here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can talk that much about Rampage because it hasn't come out yet. Can you talk about?
I mean, to some extent.
You can talk about style choices. You obviously can't reveal plot points, but. So if you could even go into a little bit more depth about how you went about creating that style guide, the visual style guide for a movie like that.
Yeah. So I mean, so one of the things, like very, very early in prep, Brad sat down with me, and he was like, I really want to find what the camera is for the film. Like, what is the camera, and how do we define it? And so it's, we had looked at a bunch of references for different styles of the movie, and that was like part of the, even when I was meeting with him early on and I hadn't even gotten on the job, I was showing him different references of how I thought the movie should feel stylistically with camera and with lighting. And that was just setting the stage of, hey, are we even on the same page, right?
Yeah.
So then we sit and we actually go through it, and we start really developing like what would this camera be like? How is the camera going to move? And from that, we came up with this driving guide that the camera was this evolving present camera, right? Where it's a camera that's embedded and feels very present, right? So it's a lot of handheld. It's a lot of like camera that's moving in response to actors. The camera never moves. In Rampage, it's not a premeditated moves where something happens and then the camera just makes a move. Everything's driven by the actors, right? So it's really embedded in the scene, but it's always evolving, right? So shots never, a shot will always, it may be cut in a way where it's like, it ends up with just a straight close up or something, but almost every shot we shot started as something, went to something else, became something else. Character moved, and all of a sudden it becomes an over that it starts as a close-up, becomes an over into a medium. Like, the inserts, there were never really any, we did almost no inserts in the movie, true inserts. They were all like, we start on the insert and the insert shifts over and becomes a distant two shot across, the pocket or whatever the
and
case
how
may
many
be.
cameras were you sporting on the shoot?
It's mainly 2 cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So
were you operating, or did you have operators?
I had operators. I operate from time to time, but I had operators.
I think like when we had Rachel on here,
Yeah.
like she was talking about how she prefers to operate, but when she did Black Panther, like,
Yeah, I mean, like when you've got movies of that scale, it's really, really difficult to operate. I mean, this is a big dilemma. If you have one camera, I love operating because you're so close to everything that's happening. But on a movie of that scale, you need to get through things much faster because it's a giant ship that doesn't move, it doesn't turn quickly, right? You have to get coverage quickly. So you're dealing with Dwayne Johnson, like, right?
Yeah.
You only get him for a limited amount of time, so you have to get all your coverage quickly. And also, it makes editorial's job super, super easy because you've got continuity of action in everything. So, So, but when you've got 2 cameras, if you are operating one, you're always stopping and going, how'd that look on the other camera? So it's a really slow process at that point. The other thing that you lose is the opportunity for collaboration with another creative mind, right? Like I love the collaboration with gaffers, right? Because it's such a fun process they come from a different experience with different tools, and you start merging those tools together, and you come up with something better than you could have come up with on your own, right? Mm-hmm. That's the whole quest. Like that's the great part about collaboration is it's like you can take an idea and bounce the idea back and forth, and all of a sudden come to something that is better than either one of you could have come up on your own. That same thing can happen with really, really good operators, where you say, this is the shot, and the shot starts here and it ends here, and it's going to move like this. And then while they're setting it up, they're like, it might be really fun if this shifts a little bit more this way, because they're only looking at that one slice. So in each position, there's more and more to think about. The director is not only thinking about the cinematography, he's also thinking about the performances, he's thinking about the costumes, he's thinking about makeup, he's thinking about all these things. Yeah. So in each, in order to be able to think about that many things, you have to have more people, unless, or the scale has to come down. So,
well, and it seems like your career too, like it's not like you were doing, like you didn't go from Brick to Rampage. You've been working your way up slowly, so the big crew is not a mystery to you.
And it's not a mystery. It's a different equation, but it's all comes down to the same thing, right? It all comes down to you're making an image, you're telling a story. I remember this really. My brother interned years ago with Ron Howard on The Grinch. And he came back home. He came home and he was like, "Oh my God, it's so amazing, so amazing." He just told me this thing, and I'm like, "What did he tell you?" He's like, "It just comes down to the box." He's like, "You got all this stuff, but it just comes down to what you're going to put inside that box, right?"
Yeah.
And it's totally right. Like you got giant stunts happening, and you've got giant CG monsters that will actually be there at some point, and you've got lighting effects, and you got all this stuff happening, but it really just comes down to a story you're telling in that frame, right?
Yeah.
It's all like it's all the same job. It's just scaled, right? The complexity is scaled.
But I always wonder, when you're making a movie the size of Rampage or The Last Jedi or one of these, major motion pictures, like huge release kind of movies where there's, I don't know what the budgets are on any of them, but I'm assuming north of $100 million on a lot of these kinds of movies. As a DP, how much of your job is now kind of managerial and overseeing like a giant team?
There's always that element on every job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that you can't do as quickly is like, I did this movie called Hours that was a nice small movie that was single camera, and what we could do on that is quickly go like, wow, it'd be like great if you just ran down the hall and like you're already shooting them running down. It's like it's super fast, right? That goes away a little bit, but in exchange for that exchange, you get things that you could never do on a movie that small. Both have pluses and minuses, but neither one becomes just managing. You're still managing other people and other artists. That's the same on both scales. Right?
I think what put this thought in my head is I read an interview with Bill Pope a long time ago, an American cinematographer, and it was on one of the Spider-Man movies. I think it was the third one. And he said that they had at one time they had 5 units running simultaneously, and he was just moving from one stage to another, kind of approving stuff. And he wasn't holding the camera. And
I don't know. I've never worked on a movie that's like that. I mean, on Rampage we had 3 units going at once, but I set up the one of them was an aerial unit, and that one I gave them some direction in terms of what I wanted in terms of the cinematography, right? Brad gave them directions in terms of what he wanted from the shots, and then we have people that are going to run that.
Well, I'm guessing an aerial unit on Rampage probably had their work cut out for them like that.
Yeah, there was quite a bit. I mean, so you go over all that stuff and then we had a second unit. In the second unit, I went over with both the second unit director and the second unit cinematographer. This is what the style is of what we're going for. This is what I've talked to Brad about. Brad talks to the second unit director about this is what we're trying to get. But then we let them go do their thing. That's, it's not me micromanaging that unit because I already have other work to do on the main unit. So I've never run a show like where I've got a bunch of units that I'm just kind of going over.
And that might have been an exception
that
too.
That might be the specifics of that show. I mean, I mean, gosh, Bill Pope's done. Yeah, he's done some amazing work like this, but I'm sure that the jobs completely vary, right?
Of course.
And it's not just all. But I've never been on a show like this.
So tell me a little bit about how did Rampage come about? Because that's a giant movie.
Yeah. So I had worked with Brad before, the director, on his previous movie San Andreas. I shot second unit on San Andreas, the whole California unit, and so he already knew me. I also shot the additional photography for San Andreas, and so we had worked together already. But it was like I'm deeply indebted to him. He went out on a big limb, because I didn't have a movie of that scale as a main unit cinematographer. Jedi absolutely helped in swaying that, but it was it was my hats off to him. It was like he saw we met and he saw a value in the relationship and in the creative. The creative discussion that we were starting. Yeah. And he went to bat to the studio and everything. And from that discussion, I created a bunch of examples and I created a bunch of content to show to both him, producers, and the studio in terms of what I actually envisioned the movie to be.
Like a sizzle reel or a Rip-O-Matic or something?
It was a series of, they were more like Rip-O-Matics. I mean, it was a series of, there was one reel that was all of the camera style for the film. So what the camera would feel like, how it would move, all of that. There was the composition and whatnot. And then there was another one that was all about lighting and how I saw the lighting in the film. And then I made a little book of stills, reference stills from all different movies and
like a mood board kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And with a discussion embedded in it of like what the parts of it were that were pertinent to different pieces in the film.
Oh wow.
And then all of that was material that then went forward to all of the parties, in play.
It's a crazy question, but is that stuff do you have that up on your website or something? Is there a way that people can see that? Because I feel like anyone can do a version of that. Mm-hmm. A version of that can be done for any film.
Yeah,
for any project, sure. by any person. And it's I always think about Rian Johnson released the Rip-O-Matic / Animatic that he made for Looper.
Amazing. Amazing.
And I think that sometimes these tools that we use and you seem like you get into kind of the nitty gritty about how you're going to do it and thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because you're trying to get everybody on the same. I mean, this is an industry built on communication, right? Yeah. And so you're trying to get everybody on the same page so that the creative energy is all pinpointed towards in the same direction, And so any of those tools are is hugely useful. The funny thing about those tools is that, and this speaks volumes to what film is those things take so long to put together because what you remember things being, what you remember films looking like, or shots how shots, you remember them being designed, is not exactly how they are.
Yeah.
And when you go back, you realize, oh wait, I always remembered it like X, but it's actually Y, right? There was this great thing that happened on Rampage where Brad was like, we talked about this one apartment being like a little bit hazy, like where you could see the dust in the air, right? And so we talked about it, like how much atmosphere is that? What exactly is it? And Brad was like, oh, it's like that shot in The Last Boy Scout where there's like this interior and it's like all hazy, it's got just a light atmosphere and you can see the light coming through the windows and blah blah blah. So I look it up and I go online and like get this little get the shot, and I'm like, holy crap, right? Because it's not light, it's like thick haze, right?
Well, it's Tony Scott.
And I'm like, so I take it in and I'm like, is this what you're thinking? And he's like, oh God, no, that's not it. But the funny part was I was like, that had happened to me so many times.
Well, the beauty of that is you can plagiarize your own imagination and no one's going to ever be upset.
For sure. But the funny thing is it's like, when it's one thing when you're just like, oh, it's like the thing, and you think you're on the same page, right?
Yeah.
But it's like when you're actually putting together something that you're going to show to somebody to say, this is what I think it should be, you start to notice all of the nuances that when you just take the one shot out of context, it isn't that thing, right?
Yeah.
But it speaks volumes to what film is, because the reason you remember it as that thing is because you're embedded in that moment and you're emotionally attached to the characters, and you don't see it for one tiny little shot. You see it in context, right? So you remember it in context. And what you're really describing is the context that you felt, like that emotional thing you felt, that the visuals all gave to you. But it doesn't mean that the visuals were exactly that thing. So I actually think it's a huge tool of like, making sure that you're actually talking about the same thing. It's like, I look at paintings and photographs and movies. It's like that creating that common vernacular. And, when you say it's a thick haze, what does that mean? Brad's a huge fan of that, of like, show me what you're talking about, because then there's no question,
Yeah. So now when you're working on Rampage, you have a second unit now that's working for you. How has doing all the second unit that you've done, how does that inform the way that you talk to them?
I try to respect what it is that I liked about second unit and what it is that I didn't. And so we had Andrew Rowlands was our second unit DP, and he's great and he's phenomenal. But I tried to not micromanage it and tried to instead give him like the general direction of what it was we were going for, the idea of this evolving camera, and try to give him the philosophical approach to the thing, not just this is where I want the cameras in all these little pieces, and you still end up with that thing of like, you've got previs that's driving shots and whatnot, but you're trying to, you hire people for a reason. You want their artistic input.
Now, are you involved in the previs process on this, or the storyboarding, or are you in those conversations?
So by the time that a DP comes on to a movie like this, there's already a lot of previs that's been started.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, as soon as you're brought in as a DP, you're brought in for a reason, for your aesthetic contribution.
Yeah.
And so to me, when I start, the previs it's a work in progress. And I mean, on any good directors that work with previs a lot see it as that. They see it as a work in progress, where it's a guideline, right? That they're not necessarily locked to, but it's a guideline.
I mean, I've heard both. Like, there was the director will remain nameless, but I knew somebody who had worked with a director who did extensive, animatics and previs and storyboards on everything, and they would this person described the process of shooting as kind of heartless, because you would just go there and just make the previs. You would just shoot the previs.
I mean, that's not been my experience with the directors that I've worked with.
I mean, I think it depends
with
on the
heavy
directors.
previs.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that exists, and I mean, like, Brad actually he really loves previs, and he loves getting into the nitty gritty of it, because you can tweak so many little things, and that's what we did. We started having these meetings, and we would go through and we would fine tune the previs. We would change things. We would suggest different shots, and then the previs would change, right? And he loves that. But then on the day, it's also just it's previs, you
It's-
know,
it's
and you
version
can,
one of his
you can
idea.
part from it if you want to. The one catch to that is that, you know, on a big VFX movie, even when you're shooting it, there are a lot of parts and pieces in the machine that have already started in a direction based on that previs.
Yeah.
You know, so there's creature design that's already in motion, even though you may change the shot slightly. And when you change the shot slightly, that impacts that creature design. So you have to be aware of all of that. But you're also, you know, when we're shooting the movie, that's when we're shooting the movie. You know, you can't be driven by previs. You're trying to use it as a tool. So, but I think that also speaks back to the idea of communication and relationships, where it's like you have to set those relationships up early so that there is that malleability of the thing, you know? I mean, if I walk into a job and I'm like, it's my way or the highway, the VFX supervisor is probably not going to be very excited about modifying anything. Whereas if we create the environment where we're all in this together and we're actually trying to make something better, then we're a team. You know?
This may be a way out question, but you talk a lot about kind of creating that environment for collaboration. Mm-hmm. Is there a specific technique, or are there specific books, or are there anything that's influenced you in that direction that you could recommend to people to kind of help them create those relationships on set? Because I feel like that's what everyone wants on set, but you don't always get it.
Wow.
If there isn't, don't worry about it. Or anything, whatever that has influenced you.
I mean,
or do you just have a knack for being, you know, good at that?
No, I mean, I think that that's something that you have to develop, those interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the thing that's important is not overlooking those interpersonal skills, right? Mm-hmm. I think that it's really easy to think that your only job is to make beautiful images, and at the end of the day, that is your job, is to make beautiful and appropriate images for a project, right? That really convey visually emotion and the story. They're right for the job. They speak volumes to what the movie is in that moment, right?
Yeah.
You know, what the characters are going through, what, you know, whatever the specifics of the shot demand. But to get to that place, there's a lot of other pieces, and you can't overlook the interpersonal skills that create the environment where you can then do that thing.
But plenty of DPs do. I mean, DPs are notorious for being grumpy people.
I don't know. I can't do that. That's not really, it's just not the way I am.
To be clear, none of the DPs I work with have ever been grumpy. But
I don't know. It's just that's not ever been the way that I've worked. I guess you could. So
no, it's just interesting to hear you talk about it.
I don't really have a frame of reference for where to get those skills.
You don't have to. I was just because it's such. But
I do think it's an important part
because it's a fundamental part of your process.
Yeah.
The only reason I asked is like I'm just curious, like, because there are plenty of people who are like, I'm going to be an auteur, blah blah blah, or whatever, and they don't think about that stuff.
Yeah, but
some of those people are successful.
But you know, the one thing I would say is one of the things. I mean, at the core of this is the prestige-faith relationship. You know, the how much does the person that you're working with respect you, and how much do you respect the other person, right?
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to be a nice guy to garner respect, and some people do that, create that prestige-faith relationship in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, and some people on the other side of the table, not the DPs, but on the director's side, may not respect somebody who's just a nice guy. Maybe they want somebody who's going to be an ass, you know, but they're like a talented ass. I don't know. I mean, that's just not how I do what I do.
Yeah.
But that probably means that there are certain directors that I'll gel with really well. And then there are certain directors that I might not. And I think you know, on some level, when you step back from the entire thing and you look at careers and you look at life, you have to find people that you collaborate well with, and you have to realize what type of artists you collaborate well with, and what type you don't.
Yeah.
And then fine tune where you're looking to work. So
no, and I sometimes, because you know we all hear stories about the people who are screamers or whatever on set, and I'm thinking like, it doesn't matter how successful they are. Yeah. That's a miserable person.
For me. Some people like that. I don't know. Yeah, that's not really my I just don't want to be that person in life. And that's a different discussion of like what energy do you want to put out into the world? You know?
Yeah. In Rampage, you're also dealing with massive amounts of CGI created stuff, which you're talking about. And obviously I'm sure it's in the previs or storyboards and, you know, all the work, all the pre-work that you've done before you get to set. But how do you work on set when somebody is interacting with an imaginary thing?
I mean, it varies per scene and what the thing is. Like the one thing to remember is you're working from the end backwards, right? So whereas, and with everything, when everything is real, you build the whole thing in the frame and that's, and now you're looking at it all, right? And you work within, you know, the reality of the situation. With CG work, you have to work backwards. So you have to imagine what the end result's going to be, right? And then work backwards from that so that you're putting things in the right places. There's got to be light that works in the right way for the end result, not necessarily what's easiest on set. So you have to have interactive light that works on the characters that you know is going to exist there later. And that's a back and forth relationship that doesn't always come from the previs or storyboards.
Well, like let's say, and again, I don't know anything about, I haven't seen the movie, so this is not a plot point, but if there's, say, we know that there's shots at a building with a giant gorilla, right? Are you setting up something to create shadows that then are they're gonna fill that in with CGI?
Yeah, gorilla? I mean, so we're creating. We had some very large rags that shifted into place to represent George at times. You know, George is the gorilla. So as things move, you know, you want that interactive light, and that may mean bringing lights in or taking light away. And then some of the times you're doing some work on set, and then you're accentuating it in downstream in the pipeline. That's all got to be part of the plan, and it's got to be set up ahead of time. But I mean, there's a part about cinematography that to me is prep is like the most stressful and the most exciting time on a movie. Because that's the time where you're actually conceiving of everything.
Yeah, it could be anything.
It can be anything, and you're figuring out what you want it to be. When you get to set, if you've done your work, you're executing a plan. And that plan is going to shift dramatically, and you need to be able to move with it and change with it. But the design of shots and the design of what you're conceiving of, that's something that happens in prep. And so that same like visualization of an image is the process for CG work. But that's the same for CG work as it is for you know, physical photography.
Yeah.
Because that step is the same. The next step is different. The execution piece is different because you're building. It's like one's additive and one's subtractive, right? You're like you're building the set in front of you, and the other one you're starting with the end thing and you're subtracting back to what you have that's real, right? But the beginning of that is this exact same starting spot.
Now, when you're doing something that's as heavily CGI, but also like they're CGI characters that have emotions and feelings and stuff like that. And as a DP, you spend a lot of time lighting faces and getting making sure that expressive faces can convey emotion. Do you have any say in like the CGI setup or rigging or the way that they're lit in post? Do they bring you in and have you consult on that stuff?
It's not so it's not done. I didn't come into like Weta did the animals on Rampage, and I didn't go to Weta and talk to them about how they should model their light. Instead, what happened is I lit the shots on set, and we had a reference head for George, you know, and reference material, and I lit the shots how I wanted them to look downstream once the character's actually in them. Right.
So on the shoot,
you match that.
Oh, okay.
So now there's some shots that are entirely CG, but the entirely CG ones are dictated within the context of the photography that we've actually set up already. Right.
Yeah.
And it's also a discussion too with Colin Strauss, our VFX supervisor, of saying like, I mean, there are things where I'm like, hey, we're gonna put a light right up here, and it's gonna flare the lens. So when the camera turns, I'm gonna need you to make sure that, you know, that stays in the shot. And it builds that lighting into the set, right?
Oh, that makes sense.
So it's still collaborative, but you drive it from the physical photography on set.
Yeah, I mean, because like there are some movies like Life of Pi, obviously, where like so much of the environment, like basically what is lit is the boat and the guy in the boat, and then there's a tiger that has to be lit, and the whole environment that has to be lit. And I always wonder how much of that.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it depends.
I don't know
from film to film.
So I don't know whether Claudio was brought in post to oversee any of that other lighting, but he for sure did interactive lighting on set that,
of course,
that preconceived of what that lighting would be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I can see both sides of the coin of saying like, oh, well, when something's so CG, how much of it is physical and how much of it is the VFX, right? How much is the photography, how much is the VFX? But at the end of the day, you're conceiving of it. And that's my point, is like that conception of the shot is something that happens in prep.
Well, it's just something that I wonder about, because I do wonder how, like, for instance, Roger Deakins consulted with Pixar on a bunch of movies, including WALL-E, on how to get the optics right.
Yeah, for sure.
And I feel like, having a DP who really knows the optics, the physical parts of it, working on something that's got a lot of CGI, like I just wonder where the overlap is.
I mean, this gets into a philosophical discussion of where the future of imaging lies. I mean, because at some point we're going to get into computational photography and computational photographic cameras, right? Where what we're capturing on set is about data, not about a flat image.
Yeah.
And at some point, does the job of a cinematographer shift to one where part of it is done on set and part of it is done in post? That's totally conceivable.
Yeah.
And it's totally conceivable that there could be a time where the actual on-set capture is something totally different. But there's still the idea of how you conceive of shots and how you you design shots. That's still going to have to exist. The form of the job may change over time because of technology and whatnot. But the idea of like, I see an image in my head, and this is how we design that image. The implementation of that, or the execution of that image, may change with technology. And we don't know, for sure computational photography will impact it.
So I've heard a little bit about computational photography. You clearly know way more. Like
I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
It's very simply,
I've seen like the prototypes of those cameras.
Very simply, computational photography is just the very idea that you're not necessarily making your image in camera at the point of capture, right?
Yeah.
That there is multiple steps downstream that
you're basically just capturing the field of everything.
It may be light field, and maybe like there are a bunch of different ideas for different types of computational photography, and that field is blowing open. I mean, it's like, a lot of it is being driven by consumer cameras. Like, I mean, your iPhone has computational photography built into it.
Yeah.
Right. But the simple idea, the basic idea of it is you're going to do processing downstream from the image capture that is going to end up yielding the actual image. And it allows for a lot of creative control, and what that creative control is change. That's going to change in the future. So right now you may say, okay, well, it's about focus. You can change focus downstream. You can change your lens downstream. You can change, you can change your lighting downstream.
You can make it 3D downstream.
You can make, there's all sorts of things that you could do, but computational photography is a field moving forward fast. And so I don't know what it's going to bring, and I don't know what it's going to bring when it impacts the film business, the motion picture business. Lytro is working on, they have a motion picture camera. We tried to get it for a shot in Rampage, but it's at a very prototype level at this point, and they were rebuilding the sensor, and they didn't have the sensor available in time. The sensor is the size of an Apple Cinema display. I mean, it's a gigantic, but it's about data capture, right? Yeah. So it's a totally different approach to imaging, but when that technology comes full form, then it could have massive implications. We don't know how, but I think at the end of the day, the job of a cinematographer is still going to be relevant and important, but what it is may change. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great place to leave it. So if people wanted to see your work online, where can they find you?
My name is JaronPresant.com. Got a bunch of work there.
On Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or any of that fun stuff?
Twitter and Instagram is Flying Baboons.
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook, I'm on Facebook too.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. All right, so that was Jaron Presant. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out, Jaron.
Thanks for being on the show. It was so much fun. And if you didn't listen to his war story on Johnny Durango, you really must. It's fantastic.
I loved that war story. It's such a great war story.
There's a lot of truth. I think everyone's had maybe not that experience, but something like it or a close call like that.
When we talked about doing war stories, I was imagining more stories like that one.
It's exactly it.
And there aren't that many, surprisingly, there aren't that many that are like great hazing stories.
Yeah.
So who is our war? Now live up to that. Who's our war story today, Illya?
Our war story today, though, is also fantastic. Our war story is from Robert Mclachlan. So Robert Mclachlan, you've seen his stuff. If you've seen Game of Thrones, if you've seen Ray Donovan,
Never heard of it.
If you've seen The Affair,
Nope.
You've seen Westworld, you've seen Human Target. Actually, he goes all the way back to MacGyver. I mean, he's
Sweet.
Yes, Robert Mclachlan's done amazing work, and he tells a fantastic story from some of the early days of his career.
All right, well, here we go. Robert Mclachlan's war story.
And now, war stories.
I was doing a documentary about a choir that was on tour in Holland, and they would go there every other year, and these kids, a boys' choir, and they would perform in all these medieval cathedrals all over Holland, and then on the non-performance days, we'd film them going around. It's just a really nice little 1-hour TV special for Canadian television. And one day we were in the Mauritius Museum in The Hague, and the kids were being given a tour. The museum was closed that day, and the docent gave them the tour, and we filmed the kids, getting the tour and being lectured about the Vermeers there and so on and so forth. And after they were done, I went around to actually photograph the paintings. It was kind of heaven to have this one of the great museums of the world and the Vermeers to yourself. While you filmed it, I had one helper helping me, put some lights up, and we were photographing them. And I set my camera up, and I was taking a shot of the painting, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, and it was crooked. And without thinking, I just reached over with my knuckle, and I gave the bottom of the frame a little tap, which is, I don't recommend that you do. And holy cow, I've never heard louder or more alarms in my life. People coming up, guards running up. Apparently the police had been, there were police converging on the museum. And the British director and producer of the show was just awe-stricken. I think he was positive that we were all going to go to jail, but at the very worst, his cameraman was going to go to jail and he wouldn't be able to finish. He was a very high-strung guy anyway. And anyway, the director of the museum came up, and we were like standing there, deer in the headlights, like, I'm sorry. And anyway, they shut the alarm off, and he very wryly thanked me afterwards for straightening the painting, because he said that it had been bothering him for a while, that it was crooked, but this is what it would take to get it straight again. And yeah, so that was me and the girl with the pearl earring.
And now, short ends.
All right, so that was Robert Mclachlan's war story. Thank you so much, and you can look forward to his episode, hopefully a whole lot sooner than the last episode, because I'm not having another child anytime soon.
And we also did hire a new editor. Mike, unfortunately for us, had to go do other things. So
thank you for your service, Mike Wilbanks. You're a champion.
Thank you, Mike. But I'm also very excited about Benjamin Katz, who's now come on board and cutting, and he's going to get some of our backlog taken care of, and we're going to have some more episodes roll out real soon.
Yeah, he is awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for adding the confusion of two Bens in the workflow.
So Ben, it's that time of the show again when we talk about our short ends.
Yeah, so my pet obsession actually relates to this podcast that I did, which I co-wrote with my frequent collaborator, Bob DeRosa. Bob and I do 20 Seconds to Live together. And when we started kind of breaking it on, literally cork boards and index cards with, push pins holding them in and laying it all out, he said, what would you think about doing this in fade in instead of final draft? Now, I've I've had, I've been a Final Draft guy literally since college. I think it might have been brand new at the time. And I had been upgrading it, whenever a new upgrade came out, like a greengrocer, I would pay for the friggin' upgrade, which was usually like $70 or $80, every few years. And I feel like it would generally not give me any awesome new functionality, but I wanted to stay current. And sometimes you have to upgrade just to be on the current operating system of, your computer and stuff. But Final Draft, as anyone who's used it knows, is a fugly. It's a fugly program with a lot of...
aside of fugly.
It has, seriously, but it's got like a lot of like legacy code in it, and it's clunky and it's glitchy and it's ugly. And so I downloaded a trial version of Fade In. Fade In costs like $80, which is the cost of one upgrade for Final Draft. And it's $80 forever. You're going to pay that once, and all the upgrades supposedly are free. And it is a much, I know this is a stupid thing to bring up in terms of screenwriting, but if you're sitting there writing something all day long, if it looks ugly, it just, anyone who's written anything knows that there's no excuse too small to quit writing to go fuss about something else. And Final Draft gives you miles of that. And I had heard about Fade In on another podcast, Script Notes, which is hosted by John August and Craig Mazin. And they actually had, Craig Mazin's been using Fade In for years. They brought the former CEO of Final Draft onto their show once and grilled him about the balls that they had to charge people as much money as they charged, and to like not really upgrade the software or make it any better, or make it any better looking, or make it any more functional, but to charge these whopping fees. And to buy Final Draft, I think, is still like $250. So my short end is a strong unpaid endorsement for Fade In, which I have officially moved from Final Draft for. And anything you need Final Draft to do, Fade In does it. Or if, like for instance, you're bringing it into budgeting or scheduling software and they have to have it in Final Draft format to do it, it exports into FDX, which is the Final Draft format. So, so if you're thinking about doing some screenwriting, I highly recommend checking out Fade In as a professional level solution that is cost effective and much better to look at. And I didn't even really get into the...
Can you import though? If you were halfway through in Final Draft your magna opus, can you then import that into Fade In and
I believe you can. I haven't tried. But also I'll say this, that within the layout, which is very elegant and easy to look at, there are like some very simple tabs that let you go through and look at all your characters and look at all your locations and look at your whole script in an outline form. And when we're making this podcast, which is 10 episodes, and it's not the most complicated thing, but at its heart, it's kind of a mystery. You can like look at the flow of scenes even, and you can look at it in index card mode. And there's all these things you can use that are tools. Honestly, most of what we did was just straight up screenwriting, and for that, it looks good, it works fast, I'm pretty sure it imports FDX. Haven't tried that. Oh wait, no, I did try that. When I first opened it, I opened up an old script of mine in Final Draft to see if it would open it, and opened it no problems.
Hey,
all right. So and
they're really pulling out all the stops to get people to switch. They're really making it easy.
Well, I mean, I just think Final Draft is a tired 1990s legacy piece of software that really isn't doing anyone any favors anymore.
So if I like writing and feeling very retro and want to have this sort of like 90s vibe all the way through, stick with Final Draft.
Play some Smash Mouth in the background.
Hey man, you're an all-star.
And crack open Final Draft on your new bus Mac from like 1994.
Maybe drink a Zima.
You can still get that. Anyway.
Can you really?
Yeah, I saw it at Ralph's.
All right, so we're digressing. My short end, my obsession this week is actually something that people have seen, but maybe didn't know what they were seeing, and it's called Univisium. Univisium was actually originally called Univision, and it's a format that was popularized, at least in modern times, by Vittorio Storaro. You've heard of him, right? He's a 3-time Academy Award.
He's been around.
He does good work. Yeah. Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. So why did they choose to name this the same thing as the Latino cable network?
Well, that's the thing. I think that when this came around 20-something years ago, when Vittorio came up with this format, maybe the Latino cable network was not as popular, or maybe it wasn't.
So this precedes Univisium.
Possibly, or I believe that Vittorio is based in Italy, and maybe there isn't Univision there. So anyway, at some point it became Univisium to avoid confusion, and there is a bunch of
Univisium with an M at the end.
Univisium, yes.
Okay. And
yes.
okay, so what is this thing now?
Okay,
say the idea.
Okay, this is a 2-to-1 aspect ratio. It's not 2:3:9. It's not 2:3:5. It's not 1:8:5. It's a format that is twice as wide as it is tall, and it actually offers some really nice features to filmmakers who would like to have a widescreen format that looks pretty darn good on a 16:9 sort of standard HD TV. And looks great in a theater. It still has the widescreen effect. In fact, actually, back in the 50s, there was something called Super Scope or Super. There was a couple of different formats that were also 2-to-1, but didn't really catch on and didn't stick around. But the Univisium format that Vittorio has been the driving force behind, and the creator of this format, which is essentially a play on 3x35. I'm not trying to get too technical here, but a lot of different filmmakers have been adopting this, including big studio feature films like Jurassic World. The last Jurassic World movie was shot in 2-to-1, and then also huge streaming shows, a lot of stuff for Netflix like House of Cards, Ozark, plus also CBS's first streaming show, the reboot of Star Trek, the Star Trek Discovery. Of course. That's being shot 2-to-1. So you've got,
but it's being shot 2-to-1. I mean, so does Univisium just refer to that aspect ratio, and it doesn't matter if it's film or digital or whatever it is?
Well, in the film side, there was a few extra sorts of things, but I would say the thing that the Univisium format now is most known for is this 2-to-1 aspect ratio. And this 2-to-1 aspect ratio seems to be catching on. And I'm sure. Oh yeah, Fargo was shot in 2-to-1. You'll see more and more people using this going forward. Netflix has already said that they really like the format. So it's something new, and it's also something old, and it looks great. It looks great on a 16:9 TV. It looks great in the theater. So definitely plan on noticing your aspect ratios maybe a little bit more, that the black bars in your widescreen don't look so big anymore on your TV set.
Well, here's a question, and I'm saying this as a former projectionist, and I was a projectionist with 35 millimeter. If you're in a movie theater that's showing that, is it just showing like a 1:8:5 aspect ratio, slightly cropped, and they have to just kind of custom set the curtains or something, or is that a lens change for modern projectors? I don't know if modern projectors have to do lens changes like I used to have to do.
Yeah, now with the modern digital projections, it's a masking change only, and but yeah, 2-to-1 plays nicely in both theaters.
So there's no lens changes at all. I mean, I assume if you're projecting film, it's the same crap that you always had to do.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So now I've revealed myself for being the Dark Ages creature that I really am.
I'm just glad people are still going to the movie theaters. So I'm so glad.
I'm glad that some people get to go to movie theaters. Some people are just at home changing a baby's diaper a lot.
This is a problem of your own making. So so
tell me about it.
You are responsible for every diaper that you are changing right now.
No, I don't mind changing the diapers. I just want to see Hereditary. Anyway, so I think that about wraps us up.
I'm pretty sure that can be arranged. I'm pretty sure that your child will sleep straight through that.
I don't know that they're doing Mommy and Me screenings of that. Anyway, but I think that wraps us up. Illya, where can people find you online?
They can find me over at hotrodcameras.com.
And also Cam Noir, correct?
That's right, Cam Noir. That's the official home of the podcast.
Yeah, so check that out. I can be found most readily as Neptune Salad, at Neptune Salad on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook, where you can find me at benrockonline.com. This episode was edited by Ben Katz, our new best friend, Ben Katz. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben.
And 100% of the music that you're hearing on this was created by K's Alatractchi. I hope that by now somebody has emailed K's and just asked him literally anything. You can go to musicbyks.com and just tell him you heard him on the podcast and you like his work. That's really, if somebody would do that, it would make my year, because I keep checking in with them to see if anything has happened as a result of letting us use all this music.
Yeah, and of course, Alana, Kode, thank you for helping to produce these shows.
Yes, awesome. They would not be getting cranked out at the speed that they've been getting cranked out at. Again, this one notwithstanding because of, baby-related issues. But thank you so much for all your hard work and lining up all these amazing guests we've been getting, too.
And I think that's it. I think we thanked everyone.
I think we have. I'm just super rusty at doing this because it's been a few months. Anyway, thank you so much, and we will see you shortly with Robert Mclachlan.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.